Welcome, everyone, to Project Echo, the best practices for aging care delivered directly to you. My name is Pam Yankeelove, and I'm the Director of Research at the University of Louisville Traeger Institute, and we're glad you're here. For those of you guys who haven't worked with Zoom in a while, we're going to ask that you go on and do a few things. Keep your camera on. We ask that you go on and keep your microphone muted. And if you want to talk, you can unmute, or you can also go on and put a message in the chat. If you are having difficulty with your sound or your video, you can click on the little arrow to the microphone, to the left of the microphone, or the video, I guess it's to the right, to check your system to see if it works. You can also take a picture of the information there on the right of the slide that gives you access to the meeting ID. And we hope that you don't have any technology problems so that you're able to stay with us and participate the whole time. Project Echo, the care of older adults, is a collaboration between the University of Louisville Traeger Institute and the Kentucky Coalition for Healthy Communities. And we thought we'd begin with just an introduction as to the mission and vision of KCHC. So I believe that Mona will be able to put her microphone on and share.
Yes, thank you so much, and welcome everyone to the ECHO and KCHC meeting. The KCHC Coalition is a group of people who've come together wanting to create community support systems for our older adults. And we do that in partnership with the local coalitions and organizations, knowing that working with them gives us people within that particular region that knows the resources and what's going on. Another thing that's really important to us is developing the workforce and concerned community members to empower our communities to become healthier. And you'll hear more about this toward the end when the KCHC has a few moments to speak with you, and hope that you will become a part of us and help us with the work that needs to be done in the state of Kentucky. Thank you, Pam.
Thanks, Mona. So if you're unfamiliar with Project Echo has been around for about 15 years. It was developed by an MD by the name of Sanji Arora, who is also a hepatitis C expert from the University of New Mexico. And he actually, throughout his career, was noticing that people were driving 200 to 300 miles to come see him. And so he wasn't building capacity. He was just giving one appointment to another person. So he decided to develop this platform called Project Echo, and it is a tele-mentoring platform. And the idea is that we move knowledge, not patients. And really the goal is to build capacity at a local level. So a Project Echo kind of has a rhythm to it. It has a didactic by an expert in a particular area. Then we have a case presentation, and our hope is to be able to take the information that we've learned from the didactic and be able to incorporate it into the case so that we can learn together. It's a teach-all, learn-all kind of approach where we teach best practices and interdisciplinary team-based care. So we are glad that all of you are here. We do ask that you go on and let us know that you're here by typing your name and your organization in the chat. I'm going to go on and do that myself and go on and model that for you. This helps us get a sense of who is in our learning community, and I get a sense to get to know one another and be able to reach out to one another as we work with our communities and our clients. We also ask that if you haven't done so already, go on and add your name underneath your video square. And the way you do that is you just click on your little video square, and there's 3 little dots. You click on the dots and a little dialog box will come down, and there's a place there that says rename. And you can go on and change your name and your organization on there. If you would like an attendance certificate, we could definitely provide that to you. We just ask that you go on and complete the short survey at the end. It will be actually something that we will all be completed. It would be a poll that we'll present in the Zoom meeting at the end of the session. And if you would like a certificate, there's a way that you can go on and let us know that you would like that certificate in that particular survey. So today we have DeShara Doub, who is an MSSW and Marriage and Family Associate from the Vision of Promise, presenting intergenerational trauma impact on grandparents raising grandchildren. And before we have DeShara go on and present, I would like to share a little something about DeShara. So DeShara Doub is a compassionate servant leader, a mental health professional, social worker, public speaker, and educator who has an unwavering commitment to social justice and equality for oppressed and underserved populations. She is the founder and the chief executive officer of Vision of Promise, LLC. Her therapeutic approach is collaborative and utilizes a common factors framework, recognizing that people are the expert in their lives. Her clinical emphasis includes multicultural, premarital and couples, death and end of life, grief and loss, spirituality, religion, and racial trauma. We're so glad to have DeShara with us today. DeShara, when you are ready, you can take the mic.
Absolutely. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Yankee Love. I appreciate you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. As you can imagine, this conversation is so vast, so broad. So I'm going to do my very best to try to condense it down to about 25 minutes or so. And so I will ask for you to bear with us in terms of questions and commentary. You are more than welcome to also put that in the chat as we go along. But I'm very excited to be here. And I'm also a proud alum of the University of Louisville's Kids School of Social Work as well. So next slide, please. So I wanted to go quickly over the learning objectives for today's presentation. The first is to gain insight into the phenomenon in regards to intergenerational trauma. It's also known as historical and multi-generational trauma. So these are interchanged depending on what research and what environment you're in. The second learning objective is to assess how multi-generational events can introduce and or exacerbate symptomology related to intergenerational trauma. This can include historical, also familial, and also some society factors. And finally, to assess community and institutional resources for continued support. And that will also be guided as well with our case study. So next slide, please. We went over housekeeping already. So again, if you have any questions or comments throughout the presentation, feel free to put that in the chat. Next slide. All right, so they have already did a wonderful job in terms of letting you know information about me. I'll have my contact information at the end, so you are more than welcome to reach out to me post-presentation if you have any additional questions or just want to have some dialogue further. Next slide. So again, we are all professionals here, but I definitely always like to do some type of trigger warning in my presentations. Again, it's never intended to present information that might cause an adverse reaction to people. But again, we all have our individual lives as well as how we serve people within the community. So all I ask from you is just to attend to yourself and care for yourself from this presentation. If by chance you find that you are having some adverse responses, some things that are kind of lingering after the fact, I definitely will recommend you hold on to that, contact your local mental health professional. You also can put in the chat if there's any maybe lingering questions and things of that nature, and I'll try to my best to be able to guide you to the proper supports. So next slide, please. So the first thing I want to do is go over intergenerational trauma briefly. Next slide. So I wanted to ask, and what we'll do for the sake of time is kind of ask you in reflection, right? So typically when people hear the word intergenerational trauma, depending on what environment you've been in, what your experiences are, you could have some different thoughts around who and whose will be a part of this grouping. So one thing I want you to kind of think about through this presentation is what thoughts or feelings come to your mind when you hear this phrase. Does it have any particular lingering in terms of particular populations you work with? Is it something you might be interested in? Maybe for some of you, you have no idea what intergenerational trauma is, and that is okay. This conversation has been brought up in the recent because of the pandemic and a lot of the other racial discourse within our country. So I'll go over that in as much depth as possible throughout our time together today. So next slide, please. So what I want to do is give you just a brief video around what is intergenerational trauma, so you can play whenever you're ready.
The story of our communities, people and nation starts a long, long time ago. More than 60,000 years, in fact. This was when our culture and our law first started to thrive. We knew who we were and where we belonged. We took care of each other, our land and our waters. We ate food that made us healthy, lived on country and abided by our laws and song lines. Our families, our children were happy, with strong minds and hearts, because they were where they belonged. But then, everything changed.
Colonization came, bringing wars, disease, famine, violence, and the destruction and violation of our cultural laws, sacred sites, families, and communities.
We were denied our knowledge, language, ceremonies, and identity, the very things that tell us who we are and where we belong. And our connections with each other and the land grew weak.
And then, our children were taken from us. They had their names changed and their identities stripped away. They were told that Aboriginal people were bad. Worse still, they were told that their parents and grandparents did not want them.
For years this happened, and those children became known as the stolen generations.
Our children were denied love and experienced physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. This left very deep, very complex, and very real wounds, leaving scars that are still being felt personally, socially, spiritually, and collectively.
In the time when our story started, we were able to parent in the cultural way that has seen our families survive and thrive for generations. Our people were strong, and our culture flowed and healed us in times of hurt.
But since the trauma of colonization and the stolen generations, we have not been able to heal in the same way. And we have unknowingly passed this trauma on to our children through sharing our sad stories and having them witness and experience our pain. This is known as intergenerational trauma, and we see symptoms today in broken relationships, disconnected families, violence, suicide, and drug and alcohol abuse.
But this is not where our story ends. We still have strong minds and hearts, and we still know who we were and where we belong. By creating safe and strong communities together, supporting our families to be free from pain, returning to our culture and building a strength of identity, we can stop the cycle of trauma and bring about positive intergenerational change, so that we can continue to thrive for the next 60,000 years. There are simple things that we can all do to help heal our trauma.
Visit healingfoundation.org.au to find out more.
So I think this is such a wonderful video to show, to kind of give some context on the multi-layering of intergenerational trauma. So I'll definitely encourage you, if you're digging deeper into this topic, to definitely review that video at any time. But I wanted to also provide a definition, and this is from the American Psychological Association, or known as APA, which reads as follows. A phenomenon in which the descendants of a person who has experienced a terrifying event show adverse emotional and behavioral reactions to the event that are like those of the person himself or herself. These reactions vary by generation, but often include shame, increased anxiety and guilt, a heightened sense of vulnerability and helplessness, low self-esteem, depression, suicidality, substance abuse, disassociation, hypervigilance, intrusive thoughts, difficulty with relationships and attachment to others, difficulty in regulating aggression, and extreme reactivity to stress. Next slide, please. So I wanted to also provide some clarity in terms of what are some of the signs and symptoms of intergenerational trauma. Now, again, this is very baseline. It can definitely differ from person to person, but I wanted to kind of draw your attention because as you can see, there's a component for the person directly impacted by that event. But there's also some symptomology by a person that will experience it through that person or in community with that person, also known as secondary. As you can see on here, there is a lot of emotional and psychological symptomology, but there's also a physical element that can also be in an association as well. So I think that's really important as we're dealing with a generation that is raising grandchildren. If you can only imagine when you're talking about health implications, also in association with many of these other factors, there can be some very big impacts moving forward. So next slide, please. So I wanted to, again, kind of have some reflection on this. So again, based on the American Psychological Association's definition, I want you to kind of think about, based off of that, now who could fit within the classification of intergenerational trauma. So next slide, please. So let's get into how it impacts the generations. So I want to kind of draw your attention to the vast amount of generations that are currently amongst us within society, which I think can be a great asset within our community. So currently, as of right now, we can have 6 generations amongst us, right? And I wanted to kind of draw your attention for those that cannot quickly do math or have no idea of the titling and even the years in which these generations fall. Our what I call our seasoned members of our community is known as the silent generation, which was mentioned in that video. These are individuals that will be between the ages of 95 and 78. The baby boomers within research are the common generation that are raising grandchildren. So I wanted to inform you all kind of what that age gapping is. It's between 77 and 59. We can go all the way down to Generation Alpha. Yes, we now have to go to that naming convention, and that's those that are 12 years of age and under. So when we think about research in terms of who is being raised, you're talking about it can be a gap between 5 generations of those that are actually raising their grandchildren versus the kiddos that are actually in school and are actually being reared. So next slide, please. So I wanted to draw your attention when we think about intergenerational trauma through the scope of what would be deemed as the generations and what events impacted them. I wanted to kind of give you all a scope for those of you that maybe need a brief history lesson or maybe never even heard of these events. I want to kind of go over with them quickly. When we think about intergenerational trauma, we're thinking about people directly impacted and in secondary. So I wanted to kind of give you all that scope. Again, based off of this intergenerational trauma, it could be anything from natural disasters. Unfortunately, we've dealt with mass shootings within the last few decades, famine, wars, pandemics. So when you think about American slavery, so let's start there. From the silent generation, you're talking about 63 years between the time in which American slavery concluded and the silent generation was born. So I think that that's a really good indication to kind of wrap your head around when you're talking about even historical narratives, right? When we talk about the Holocaust, that occurred during the births of the silent generation. The atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, also the silent generation. When you talk about the Vietnam War, you're talking about between baby boomers and Generation X and et cetera. September 11th, which most of us are probably more familiar with, again, that's from the silent generation to Generation Z. all those generations were directly impacted and were present during those kind of events. And of course, unfortunately, we can also add the pandemics of 2020. So I wanted to kind of wrap your head around this, because when we're talking about the implications of grandparents raising grandchildren, we want to also think about the societal factors. What are things that could be impacting? So that's anything from illnesses, economic implications, health implications, things of that nature. So I think that's a really good baseline for all of us to consider when we're working with populations that's also raising their grandchildren as well. So next slide, please. I also think, again, that it's really important to also think about some of the populations that directly impact us, specifically those that are in Louisville. So you're talking about descendants of refugees. We have a very strong refugee population within Louisville and also a lot of surrounding counties. These are also those that can be impacted. The last dot, and this comes directly from the American Psychological Association, you're talking about children, grandchildren, and also great-grandchildren. So even outside of the implications of a grandparent needing to raise their grandchildren, I think really connecting intergenerational trauma to that is absolutely imperative, because this is a huge factor. There's already implications that can really cause a lot of discourse and a lot of challenges within this already, even prior to the familial and society impacts directly in that situation. So next slide, please. We'll go on to the next slide if we can. Thank you. So let's briefly go over kinship care and its connection with intergenerational trauma. Next slide. Thank you. So this is a very, I would say, a niche area in terms of research, one that definitely requires a lot more intensive research, not only in the quantitative aspect, but also the qualitative. Qualitative, getting direct interviews, being able to really hear the stories of individuals that are really directly impacted. But I wanted to kind of give you some figures based off of some current research, okay? As of 2021, they say almost 3 million children, so 4% of all children, are being raised in what is called kinship care. Kinship care is the shortened version of grandparents raising grandchildren, okay? Kinship care is most often women of racial minority status. So that's why it's also really important to really intertwine intergenerational trauma as well, because if you're saying that most of the individuals that are taking on the mantle of raising grandchildren fall within a racial minoritized population and also a gender minoritized population, that's also something really to consider as well. And finally, children who have been traumatized within their birth parents or within their homes, and that could be a myriad of things, anything from physical, emotional, sexual abuse, substance abuse, etc. A lot of times they are rarely provided that professional support, whether that's mental health or social service supports, when they transition into their grandparents' home. So I think that's also something for us to consider as professionals, of making sure that that transition of services is also carried on with grandparents. So next slide, please. I also wanted to kind of draw your attention to a couple of other statistics. They say about 140,000 children were orphaned during the pandemic. So you're talking about between 2020 and I'll say about roughly 2022. It can even go a little bit further. Now these children are living with their grandparents, or who will be considered next of kin. There's a lot of implications legally around that. That could be anything from like an aunt or uncle or someone within their familial circle, but more than likely, a lot of people find stability directly with grandparents. So that's a lot of the option if no one else is around. So I wanted to draw your attention to that. Some common factors of grandparents raising grandchildren include anything from substance use disorder, again, child neglect and abuse, abandonment, again, mental health issues, incarceration, interpersonal violence within the family, unfortunately, an early death or a known death, and this also results commonly with a lot of economic disadvantages. So when you consider grandparents raising grandchildren, if you think about economically, you're talking about most of the times individuals that have retired. So think about retirement benefits or the lack thereof, maybe Social Security. Sometimes there's some legality situations within that. And so I also think that that's a really important factor to also consider. Some growing concerns within the grandparents raising grandchildren research include behavioral difficulties and conduct with children, emotional disturbances, and then in addition to grandparent stressors with the strained relationships with the birth parents, financial issues, as well as health implications. Next slide, please. I also wanted to draw your attention to this particular graphic, and this is something that came from a research study that was actually conducted last year, so something fairly recent. This is actually the continuum of what this evolution is happening with grandparents raising grandchildren. So it goes all the way from just having some cohabiting or co-parenting with grandparents. So there's multi-generational households and maybe the grandparent has more of a role in the rearing. And then it goes all the way to no parental involvement at all in the grandparents having solo parenting responsibilities. So next slide, please. So let's go over resources and support fairly quickly. One of the things I think is really important, and again, when you talk about grandparents raising grandchildren, I think it's really critical to, again, always have the consideration of intergenerational traumatic factors. You're talking about a generation that mental health resources were not easily available, right? Or it was taboo. Right? So you're talking about a newer generation where we have mental health practitioners in school. So you're having kiddos that are maybe having those services, but maybe the grandparents, this is a new phenomenon or a phenomenon that they're really trying to sink their teeth into and wrap their head around still, right? So I think it's really important when you're talking about the intergenerational effects that definitely mental health supports are so critical. For many of you all that are in JCPS, you're familiar with the Family Resource and Youth Service Center coordinators. That is your social service hub within schools. I highly recommend, if you do not have contacts with them, to definitely reach out. There's also mental health practitioners in every school, and they can provide these services. Anything from individual, group, and family therapy that is low cost and free, and also some coping strategies that can be beneficial not only within the school setting, but also within the home. Case management. I always give a shout out to my social workers. Case management is so critical and necessary a lot of times for grandparents raising grandchildren. They can provide anything from financial support, resources on housing, nutrition, healthcare, etc. Of course, medical interventions are critical. Community-based is also really important. You're talking about a generation that was really built on a modality that it was really communal, right? The whole community helped to raise children, and that is something that can be really important and beneficial to this generation. Education is really key. Again, this is a growing research area. So I definitely encourage you that if you are working with our more seasoned population, to definitely keep track of the growing trends going on, especially if you're having situations where grandchildren are needing to transition, whether temporarily or permanently. And then most importantly, of course, I wouldn't be a social worker if I wouldn't say self-care is also very critical. So next slide, please. All right, so this is also going to be really helpful. I would encourage you to take a screenshot of this particular page. This is the resources within Kentucky and surrounding areas. The Kentuckiana Regional Planning and Development Center actually has a Kentucky Caregiver Program that definitely can be of a great resource. They also have the KY Faces within multiple counties, and especially for those that are in Louisville, there is a neighborhood place off of Cane Run that actually have these services as well. Next slide, please. All right, perfect. So I am about 1 minute from time, but I wanted to quickly, if you could go to the next slide, please, Justin. I wanted to quickly just give you my information. Again, there's so many layerings of information, but I wanted to make sure that you can keep in contact with me. Feel free to email me, connect with me on social media. If you have just some additional questions or even just need some resources, I'll be happy to help. So I will pause there and transition back over, but I'll be here for a while if you have any questions in the chat. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that presentation. You know, at the Traeger Institute, we've been doing a lot of trauma-informed trainings, but you know, we never really talked about intergenerational trauma. And I just think that's, you know, something that we didn't talk about, but as we, you know, work with our patients and our clients in our optimal aging clinic and our institute, that we should really keep an eye to that. And I'm wondering that, you know, I have a question, and we can ask if there's any other questions too that we have. We have a few more minutes. We could do some questions. You know, for folks that, you know, may be working with grandparents in clinic, or for individuals that are working with grandparents in social service oriented agencies, how can you begin to kind of talk about the intergenerational when there might be denial or minimization or stigma, or like, how do you begin to have those conversations to get people, you know, to talk about those things?
Yeah, absolutely, Dr. Aguila. That is something I don't think anybody has figured out completely as of yet, to be completely transparent with you. I first think it's really important to build that relationship, because again, relationships are so key. To be able to really, build trust, because again, we're talking about a generation and multiple generations that did not have access to these kind of resources. If we think about it, social services for generations prior was something that was stigmatized and negative, right? The idea of taking children, right? And so I think it's really critical to, again, build that rapport. A lot of people also utilize things within like incoming client assessments to maybe ask about, like, if there's particular factors that are in association with things that can be of support, such as if they've moved recently, maybe if they have any other type of social supports that are necessary, that can also build upon some conversation as well that can dive deeper into those kind of pieces.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anyone else that has a question or a comment that they'd like to turn on their mic and have dialogue? I think one of our colleagues was actually recently at another healthcare organization and said that there was, you know, some signs about trauma, and getting people to be able to, you know, what is trauma, and asking questions about trauma. So I think as you were talking about that assessment, that's so important, both the trust and to be able to ask the question.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All righty. Well, I think that Justin put your information, who is now alias Sam Cotton, in the chat. And I think we're going to move on to the case presentation, and hope that, DeShara, you might be able to stay with us as we go through this case.
Of course.
Great. We're going to have recommendations, I believe, taken by Dr. Samantha Cotton. Is that correct? Yes. All right.
Correct.
Great. All right. And then we're going to have Desiree Newsome is going to give a presentation here. So let's see, is Desiree with us?
Yes, I'm here.
There you are. All right. So you can take the mic when you're ready.
Okay. First, I would like to go ahead and disclose this is not my case. It's actually Chelsea, Miss Sally's case, and she wasn't able to be here with us, so she asked for me to present. So I do have limited knowledge about the case, and I would like to go ahead and go with the overview. First off, our client is an active 71-year-old that works part-time at the Henderson Settlement through the Area Agency on Aging. She is currently raising her 12-year-old granddaughter, who is diagnosed with anxiety and depression, and recently obtained emergency guardianship of her newest grandson, who is 3 months old, and receives very little support from her husband in caring for the grandchildren. The first question is, what supportive services could benefit the client in a remote rural community, and where they live is extremely remote? And how do I assist the client in navigating the situation surrounding mental health issues faced by her granddaughter? Our client is 71, female. Their pronouns are she, her, and they live at home and independently. They have a diagnosis of asthma, COPD, hypertension, osteoarthritis. And their clinical measures is 5'4", weight 121 pounds, BMI 20.8, and blood pressure 146/76. Okay, the client is a 71-year-old with no physical or cognitive limitations. She reports no issues with symptoms, sexual problems, or nutrition. Her primary focus currently is raising her granddaughter and grandson. She reports that although this is a stressor in her life, she would never let him go to the state, and she reports her son has struggled with substance dependency for many years, and it hurts her more for the children than it does for her. Occasionally her son, I would like to add, her son does struggle with addiction, and they do come and stay the night with them occasionally. And that's where the son can see the granddaughter and the grandson, the 3-month-old. The client often feels alienated by her spouse and does not want to be responsible for raising the grandchildren. She takes on the role as a primary caregiver and receives very little support from him. She relies on her relationships through the Henderson settlement where she works and the church for social support. She and her husband are on a fixed income and receive some government assistance for raising the grandchildren. And her husband does take care of the 3-month-old grandson while she's at work, but he does give her grievances over having to take care of the grandson. The client frequently discusses anguish she felt around being her mother's caregiver throughout her Alzheimer's diagnosis. She states that she does not suffer from depression or anxiety, and that makes it difficult for her to support her granddaughter, as she does not understand the triggers or how her granddaughter's childhood trauma has affected her. There are many conflicts within the household, as the grandfather does not know how to navigate the granddaughter's diagnosis. And this adds to an increased pressure on the client to keep calm and peaceful environment. Client states that she feels that her husband also drinks too much at times. And like DeShara said, mental health is still a very taboo subject, especially in rural Kentucky. So not only is the grandfather upset about raising the grandkids, but he is also he doesn't understand the mental health situation. The client reports having a balanced and healthy diet. They're physically active through raising the grandchildren and at her work at the Henderson settlement. She does not have any reported instances. She does have reported instances where she feels like she has no time to sit down and eat. She does not have a history of substance abuse, but the client has been a smoker for over 50 years. And they do regularly attend church. Yes, they do have a regular source of care. They have access to medication, and they do have access to mental health services, but the client does not wish to speak with anyone, but does want to make sure that her granddaughter does receive therapy services. And they do have an overall satisfaction with care, and they do receive dental care. The client is able to transport herself to and from appointments, but they live in a very remote part of Kentucky, and they have to travel over 45 minutes just to see their provider. There is no fall hazards in the home, and she's able to keep her house tidy on her own. There is smoke detectors within the home, and the home hygiene is maintained by her and her husband, who is now a retired coal truck driver. And yes, there is good personal hygiene. The home does have carbon monoxide detectors, and the home environment is stressful as they are raising their grandchildren with little support. And the granddaughter's mental health also causes tension within the home. Primary care physician manages overall care and is available as needed for the client. And the Henderson settlement offers supportive services and activities for the grandchildren. So the granddaughter actually will go there and play in the computer lab while the grandmother is working. And the medication list, she is on naproxen, lisinopril, and duoneb treatments. Okay, what matters most for this client is that she is able to keep her grandchildren safe and provide the best possible care for them. She's interested in any and all resources available because she does worry about providing care for them as she ages, especially the youngest grandchild who is 3 months old. And she also wants to be able to better navigate conversations with her husband, as she feels this is really important to maintaining her marriage. So the first question, what supportive services could benefit this client in a remote rural community, and how do I assist the client in navigating the situation surrounding mental health issues faced by her granddaughter?
Thank you so much, Desiree. Really appreciate that. All right, so it sounds like there's several areas we could provide, both some case management ideas as well as possible some therapy for the child, and then just maybe some psychoeducation for the mom, and maybe at some point after trust, like DeShara was talking, maybe some therapy and family therapy. Any ideas anybody wants to jump into in that space?
Let me just jump in here and say, you mentioned that they are receiving some services or financial assistance. And in addition to that, I wanted to throw out here, and I'll put the link in the chat and I'll put it also in the recommendations I send you. But kinshipkentucky.org also has some resources that the grandmother might be interested in tapping into, things like support groups, stuff online that might just be beneficial for the family in general. And it also looks like they have some information here about if you do need additional things like the Community Action Network, getting other services as well. So I'm going to put that in the chat too.
Great, thank you.
I'm Patricia. I'm from California, so I'm not too familiar with rural Kentucky or the system. But over here we have something that's called respite care, and I'm not sure if she said she's getting assistance from the government, so I'm assuming like she gets some type of services for foster parents or for grandparents that are raising their children or have their children due to those type of issues. They offer respite care, which are other foster parents and that are certified that are able to care for the grandchildren if like the grandparents work or they have something to do. So I don't know if that's something that's offered over there.
Could anyone
I'll speak to that. So in Kentucky, the area agencies on aging do receive some funding. It's not a lot for the National Family Caregiver Program, where they probably have some resources for grandparents raising grandchildren. The Kentucky Family Caregiver Program still exists, but is not funded very well. So I'm not sure if the area agency on aging that serves that particular area have resources through that particular program. But through both of those programs, they can, many area agencies on aging offer respite services. So you would need to call the area agency on aging in that community, which is, I believe, Cumberland River Area Agency on Aging, to see what resources they have available and if they have respite available for the grandparents.
To build more on the support group idea, Sam, do they have online support groups as well as do the various area agency on aging have support groups?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Barbara knows a little bit more about this. I just saw this particular coalition resource page online. It looks like for more information, you actually have to call or email what's on the link. So, but Barbara
there
probably
is, on that particular page, that particular group is really, really good. They do have a grandparents raising grandchildren resource handbook. If you go to that page, you'll find a downloadable handbook. I've not looked at it in a while, but it has a lot of information in it for grandparents in Kentucky.
Do they have internet in their home? DeShara,
I'm not for sure, as it is not my case, but I can ask Jill about it.
If they live in the Henderson settlement area, it is not likely.
Yeah, it's going to be spotty at best. There's not great connection there. However, this is something maybe we could even work with Henderson Settlement, because it is a PDF, as Barbara mentioned, maybe printing off a copy for them for that piece. Now, that doesn't help with technology support for like support groups, right? But that's it looks like there's a lot of information in this handout. So
I guess I was also thinking about if there's a call in, to be able to call into a support group. I don't know if there's the possibility there. I mean, I know at Henderson Settlement, they do have internet. As you said, I know in the area it's spotty. I don't know if they can call into a support group or use the internet at Henderson Settlement.
So this particular client does work at the Henderson Settlement, so they can access the Henderson Settlements internet.
Mm.
That is not a problem. So we might want to make sure that that suggestion is there, that they work with the Henderson Settlement to, participate in support groups and access other resources while they're there.
Is there a way that the granddaughter could receive therapy at Henderson?
Yes.
Okay. And she's not currently receiving therapy?
I don't know that for sure. We have served a grandchild at the Henderson Settlement through our behavioral health services via telehealth before, but I don't know if it's the same case.
And DeShara, would you like to add something?
Yes, for sure. Just one of the things that I would add is when you're working with interdisciplinary treatment teams of any sort, especially for those that live in a rural area that maybe has some challenges of having some in-house or in-town services, I would definitely encourage, because it sounds like some of the information was maybe provided by a primary caregiver, just based off of like the demographics of health information, just making sure that they have the consent form to be able to contact different people. I see on here that will absolutely be feasible is making sure like the Family Resource Center at their school or the mental health provider has a informed consent, also any other providers and things of that nature. I know one other thing in terms of just mental health services specifically is if you are in rural areas and say that the internet is spotty, they also have sometimes some satellite offices that the client can go to directly, and they will have computers set up and the internet and things of that nature to make it easier. So I would definitely inquire about those things as well, if that is even something that can be provided, if for some reason, like secondarily, if their employment or somewhere they're used to having internet access is not available for some reason.
Great, all great suggestions. Thank you.
I had mentioned also checking to see if the granddaughter's school offers mental health services, or if they have a counselor like on site. So when she starts school, she can have access to that while she's in school.
Great idea.
Additionally, there was mention that the church was very important to her. So it would be very helpful if perhaps she could talk to someone from the church and perhaps get some guidance and even start a small support group there.
Very good ideas. Other ideas that folks have?
Yeah, additionally, for those that are very interconnected with their faith community, there's a strong possibility that they might even want to have their pastor interchanged within the treatment as well. So that's also something that you can ask on intake paperwork or within your joining process, is kind of asking about like what their social supports are within that community. And that might even be just another layering of support where professional services is not available as well.
Great. What about for the grandfather? Any ideas about the grandfather and either the standpoint of minimization style or?
It just sounds to me that he wasn't a part of the original conversation, and perhaps need to go back to that conversation. And again, having a pastor, if he too is, his faith is important to him, to kind of help with that conversation so that he can be on board. And more than likely, he is not comfortable with mental health issues and people knowing there's mental health issues. So as was said in our presentation, relationship building is going to be so very important to be able to reach him in a good way. But he really needs to be reached, or his life is going to be miserable, and of course he's going to help others. So we can't ignore him.
Right. And taking care of a 3-month-old during the day, that's a lot for any human.
And I was going to say too, especially if those initial conversations didn't involve him and now he's kind of in the mix here, that's probably adding to some of the stress. I also wonder about, really getting to know him a little bit more and uncovering some of that. If you're working with if you're thinking about the clients is not just the, one person, but the whole family in this situation, really uncovering some of those anchors that he might be invested in from a motivational interviewing standpoint. And that might help with some of that as well, especially that hesitation or that reluctance to engage in conversations about this situation.
Mhm. I would also highly recommend that possibly working with the grandmother and grandfather with getting more connected to some support services in the community, because again, I don't know the age of the husband, but the grandmother is in her early 70s, so the husband's likely to be in the age range again, and that him taking care of a 3-month-old during the day while the grandmother worked is quite daunting, and they possibly can qualify for child care assistance. Possibly. It's, the rules in that space are somewhat challenging, but it's worth looking into, worth checking out. Um, one of the issues, and I think this was mentioned by the grandmother when Desiree provided the overview of the case, is that, she does not want her children going to the state. So I've worked with grandparents raising grandchildren quite a bit. And sometimes they're fearful to seek assistance from these supportive services because they're afraid that the state's going to take the kids. So, I think having a conversation about that might be a good thing.
It's a very good point. Yeah. What about for the son? The father of the 12-year-old and 3-month-old.
Mm-hmm.
How do we, it sounds like he still comes and visits and wants to be part of his children's lives. How do we help that whole co-parenting phenomenon?
A good family therapy session.
Right. And maybe through continued trust, like DeShara.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Building the relationship. Yeah.
What will come. Maybe.
And the mother was not mentioned at all. So, what's the situation there?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And if there's that grief, like not even if she's not passed, but that grief of not having those parents in your life from the child's perspective, that I think there was a slide, Desiree, that mentioned that the teenager or young adult had a lot of issues with anxiety and depression. Obviously, all of that makes sense, but if there's a lack of, so where I'm going with this is I think a family meeting would be really good, because odds are they're probably not talking about some of this grief, and for the grandparents not to be able to understand some of that that anxiety, that depression that the child is facing or dealing with, tells me that maybe they're just not talking about the situation. So a family meeting would be good.
Right. So maybe with the school counselor or with the therapist who could provide telehealth, maybe at Henderson Settlement, bringing them in at the end of the sessions and things like that. So she doesn't see herself as being in therapy, because it seemed like that was something, or incorporating as you said, the pastor as part of the interdisciplinary team to make it more palatable to everyone that's involved. Is there any support for diapers, formula, food for the child? Is there any resources is that supported in any funding source or?
There used to be. So there were several years ago quite a few resources available for grandparents raising grandchildren, including vouchers to help buy diapers and formula and buy children clothes or whatever. I don't know what Cumberland River Area Agency on Aging situation is as it relates to the Grandparents Raising Grandchildren program. But again, reaching out to the Area Agency on Aging and just asking them if they still have funds to support that effort would be worthwhile, because they could get some good financial support. And if the Area Agency on Aging have resources to support that. There was a time, and not to get too political, but there was a time in our state government when AAAs were given the choice to use the funds that supported the Grandparents Raising Grandchildren program to continue to do that, or to help with another service that helped older adults that was being severely cut. And some AAAs made the choice in the other direction because they just had to. The need was so great there. It's like, deciding which twin to throw in the river, for a lack of a better way to describe it. So, our system of care in Kentucky for grandparents raising grandchildren need a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara, this is Jennifer Williams at Green River Ad.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you.
Hello. So sorry, my camera's not working today, but just wanted to let you know they are actually bringing back the Kentucky Family Caregiver Program, which is
Yay.
grandchildren across the state. So as of this fiscal year, that has returned. So everybody that did not continue doing that before is working on getting that off the ground again.
Oh,
so
wow.
those services are going to be available across the state.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for, I used to work at a AAA. I don't anymore, so I don't have those connections. So I'm so thankful that Area Agency on Aging directors are on the call. Thank you so much. And that is just wonderful. Of course, we continue to provide that service in the Kipton region because the need was so great, but everybody didn't have that opportunity, and it was sad when we had to make that choice. So I'm glad it's coming back.
Yes, we are excited about that, and that is they can assist up to $500 per child.
Wonderful. Yay.
That's great. And is that per year?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to hear.
That is wonderful.
There's some hope there.
That's the best news I've heard in a long time.
That's great. Any other thoughts that anyone has about?
Yes, just one thing I wanted to make sure that you all are aware of is if for some reason a county, I know we're specifically talking about this case, but I think it's important to kind of think about it conceptually. If any of you all have this type of conundrum, is definitely always go and reach out to the school if the kiddo is in a school system or within a daycare center, whatever the case. A lot of times they get donations. A lot of times they also have the resources to seek donations elsewhere. So for example, one of the many jobs that I have had is within a rural school system. And a lot of times the PTA went through local churches and local businesses to have like school supply drives, or if there was specific needs within like clothing and things of that nature. So if there is something that is needed, and say maybe a resource is limited or they have ran out of funds or whatever the case may be, because we know a lot of times when you get close to holidays or when it's back to school time, there could be things that occurs, right? I would definitely always reach out to your school system. They can be able to tap into resources that maybe an individual cannot. Another thing is also tap into your churches. A lot of times they have food pantries within communities. Within Kentucky, they have the Blessings in a Backpack program. And so through there, they have a lot of just outside resources outside of the food that are housed within these facilities. And so I would definitely say always try to find what those resources are. That's why social workers, I always will shout out social workers, are so critical, because they could be able to kind of tap into those different things, whether it's a neighboring county or within the county that you're in. So always just kind of keep that in mind too.
The only thing that I would add to that is that there's usually local coalitions or a couple of local people that know who is able to help. Because a lot of times there's individuals that are willing to help. So you need to find out who your person is in the community, or persons, or coalition. And a lot of times that is through the school and faith-based organizations.
All right. I think we're going to go on and close this part of our Project Echo and move on to our KCHC meeting. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, DeShara, and thank you, Desiree, for presenting the case. And thank you, Sam, for taking the recommendation. So we'll be able to get these back to Chelsea and Chelsea's client. So thank you, everyone. We're going to turn now to our KCHC meeting.
Okay, and as we do that, someone just put in the chat a very important point. To help the grandmother with self-care, because she's got a lot of responsibility, a lot on her shoulders. So our Kentucky Coalition for Healthy Communities, our purpose is to train and empower stakeholders and community members to provide hope and education for their communities. We want to be able to help folks like this and know where and how to get that help. Okay, next one. So we've really done a lot of sharing today, and I would like us just to take a few moments and share with each other something specific that we may have learned, and how are you going to share that with the community? What we've learned today shouldn't stay right in our own little minutes, our notes, but how can we get this out into our community? So if someone would just unmute, or if you feel more comfortable putting it in the chat, Justin will help with that. And I'm going to be quiet for a moment and let you talk.
Well, I'll start. Thank you, DeShara. I don't know if she's still on or not, but I know we'll send out another thank you to her. I really appreciate the session. I do think we need to, we need to talk more about the intergenerational trauma that many of these grand families experience. And I appreciate the knowledge, the information. I also appreciate us having a conversation about the resources that are available, or resources that we can try to make available to families like the one that was presented. And am so happy that Jennifer Williams was on the call to let us all know that the Parents Raising Grandchildren program is coming back for the entire state. I cannot tell you how important that program is for families. So regardless of what community that you work in, if you're in Kentucky, make sure you learn more about how you can access those resources for any grandparent or grand families that you might be working with. So thank you.
Hey, next. Did you learn something new today? And how are you going to share it? Go ahead, Kara.
I'm really glad for this presentation, because a lot of these resources, me being in New York City, it's hard for me to understand what these Kentucky resources are, or the regional resources that I could tell some of my participants in the virtual friendly visitor program, although that most of them are in Louisville. I noticed that some of them that I talked to are in these little towns that I would consider pretty rural. So yeah, just learning about, and they've got some of them have grandchildren, and just learning about the resources. And my grandparents raised me, so it was interesting to learn about the intergenerational traumas. And, my grandpa fought in World War II and all this stuff that, I didn't think about. So it was really interesting.
Yes, and I do hope, and I think that you do, because I've seen you on Monday nights, but you know that these area agency on aging is in every county in America. So these things may not be the very exact things that are available for other people, but you still need to know about those agencies and be able to get to know who your people are for your resources as well. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. So we want to give you an opportunity to be able to share something that may be coming up into your community that you would like us to know about. If we can help you in some way, please share that. And if you have any concerns. So again, I'm going to be quiet and let you talk for a moment. Anyone have a health fair or anything they want to share? Okay, Justin, let's go on to the next slide. And I'm going to share some things that's going on with the Kentucky Coalition for Healthy Communities. And we are doing our annual County Challenge Walk again this year. It's our 12th year, and we're really thankful for that. And so the idea is for us to get moving during the month of September. And you can walk as an individual. You can walk with teams, an organization. You can run, you can bike, you can swim, you can do gardening, you can do any type of activity that you want to do. And if you do not have a way to count steps, you can tell us what activity you did and how many minutes, because we do have a equation or a formula to be able to convert that into minutes. You will, from our flyer, be able to go to a Qualtrics to give us this information. We do have some counties, and even the University of Louisville is talking about doing some type of interagency challenge. Like Odom County, they have a challenge between their health department, their library, and their extension office. So this year, you will be able to say what county you're from, and then also if you're walking for a specific organization, so that we'll be able to get those numbers for you as well. Our counties are divided into 3 categories: small, medium, and large. And there is a traveling trophy, as you can see the picture there, for the county that wins. This past year, our counties was Jefferson for the large, medium was Shelby, and the small was Henry. We had 14 counties last year. And our goal is to increase the number of counties. And of course, if we increase the number of counties, we're going to increase the number of steps. So go on to the next slide, Justin. And we're going to talk about some other things that are going on. We meet every Monday evening by way of Zoom. We've been doing that since we got our unfriendly and unwelcomed visitor called COVID. And it has been such a good program that people have asked us not to stop doing it. Prior to COVID, I did it once a month at the North Central District Health Department in Shelbyville. And it was designed for community members as well as anyone who had had a class with me, because often after the classes, they'd say, oh gosh, I just hate that we're not going to be meeting together, and they wanted more encouragement. So we met once a month. But when COVID started, we started meeting every Monday night, and we continued that. So if you're interested in being a part of that, I've got several people on that I recognize that come pretty regularly, and we sure would like for you to be a part. Also, if you are passionate about a subject and you would like to be the leader on a Monday night, just send me an email, and I would be love to talk to you about that. We also have what we call Flourishing Together classes, and those are a 10-week. It's a free class. We do them virtually, but we also do them in person now. And we also do hybrid. We've done a combination. And participants will learn at these classes some very practical ways to become healthier. We're going to talk about nutrition. We're going to talk about movement. We're going to talk about self-care. We're going to talk about mental health, problem solving, how to read labels, all of that kind of thing. and how we are the most important person on our healthcare team, and we need to take charge of it. So we're going to learn how to live a healthier lifestyle to prevent and manage diabetes, heart disease, and other chronic diseases. And if I had time, I could just tell you story after story after story of things that have happened since I started teaching these classes in 2015. Other things going on is our Flourish program, and that was often referred to as our flagship program, the first thing that we started through the Trader Institute. And it's designed to help adults with multiple chronic conditions to improve life satisfaction. And that is through a comprehensive care and navigation program. And what we do is we assign a practicum student, and that person works with this client very closely, does very in-depth assessment, and then comes back into a bigger group, an interdisciplinary group, very much similar to what we did today, but just a little bit deeper. And we help our clients become healthier. We do have a caregiver program, and it's designed for caregivers of aging adults that are 16 and above to provide support and resources. And if you have an interest, or you know someone that may have an interest, you'll get these slides afterwards, and you can do this survey here for interest. Our person who's in charge of the program will contact you. We also have a friendly, virtual friendly visitor program that Kara referred to. And this is designed for those that are isolated and lonely. And they are contacted either weekly or twice every other week, according to the needs of the individual. Again, an assessment well versed to know when more resources are needed for this person. But usually what we find that the virtual friendly program is just what a person needed to kind of get them out of the fog and start moving. This program has seen great success as well. If you or someone you know has an interest in either be a client, or you would like to be trained and become a virtual friendly visitor program, we do have a training we love. Next slide, Justin. These are the two next classes for My Health Matters on July 24th, which is coming Monday night. I'm going to be doing a presentation. No, I'm going to change that. I didn't get that changed. No, I am right. This is the right one. I'll be doing a presentation on being silly and overcome sadness. And one of the things we want to recognize is that medicine, laughter is good medicine for the soul. And it's sometimes it's okay to laugh. And then on July 31st, Jim O'Neill, who's one of our graduated students who's still working alongside me, will be sharing about smoking less and save your body. So we hope that you will come and that you will encourage others that may the need for either one of these to come be with us. Okay, next slide.
Thank you.
All righty, so our Optimal Aging Conference is coming up. Whoops, that's the old slide. My goodness, all these old things. Well, the Optimal Aging coming up for next year. Oh, that is 2024. I am so sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, do either one of you, Justin or Barbara, want to say anything about this?
Sure. Let me, the Optimal Aging Conference is coming up next year, and we're promoting it now because our call for presentations will be coming out pretty soon. So probably all of you are on our mailing list. We'll make sure you get that call for presentations in case you have something that you'd like to share at the conference. We definitely want you to have the opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Barbara. I didn't get to preview the slides because my computer's not working. I had to come to the library to make it work. So I do apologize for that. So in closing, I just want to share our pledge from the KCHC that we will become an effective state coalition working with community members and community-based organizations to empower our state to become a healthier and compassionate people. Therefore, we will practice self-care and model healthy behaviors to our families, our co-workers, and members of our communities. And I hope that you believe that and that you practice that and you're taking care of yourself very well. Okay, sometimes the smallest step in the right direction ends up being the biggest step of your life. I'm certainly hoping that you will step up and step out for the September 1. And I'm turning it back over to Justin.
Thank you. Sam, so I'm logged in on another device and it won't let me launch the poll. Can you launch it, please?
Yes, I think it's gonna let me. Hold on. Yep, there you go.
So please complete our short poll. And if I advance the slide, Sam, will it change should the poll still be visible?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. I think you should be able to because they're separate things. Yep, looks like it's still there.
Okay, so we're going to take a break in August and we hope to see you on September 15th. We'll have building vaccine trust and improving access in geriatric populations. So that's going to be a great session in collaboration with the Kentucky Rural Health Association. So we hope everybody completes the poll. And once you've completed the poll, I hope you have a great rest of your day.